My dear child. They thought the waiting would break their heart. They thought time would erase your name. They thought one conversation would change everything. But what happened next left every person in that room completely silent. Listen carefully, because this message is not arriving by accident. There was a moment when your person sat surrounded by voices that all seemed to agree on one thing. Family members exchanged worried looks. Friends spoke with certainty. Even those who once supported their feelings began questioning whether waiting for you was still worth it. The pressure had been building for a long time, and on that particular day it finally reached its peak. One after another, people began telling your person the same story. They said life was moving forward. They said opportunities were disappearing. They said love should be practical. They said waiting was foolish. They said hope was dangerous. And then someone finally spoke the words that changed the atmosphere of the entire room. They looked directly at your person and said, "Stop waiting for them. It's time to get married." For a moment nobody moved. The words hung heavily in the air. Some people nodded in agreement. Others remained quiet, believing the conversation was finally heading toward a conclusion. They expected your person to surrender. They expected them to lower their head and accept what everyone else had already decided. After all, from the outside, it seemed easier. A new relationship would solve everything. A marriage would silence the questions. A fresh beginning would remove the uncertainty. That was what everyone believed. But nobody in that room understood what had happened inside your person's heart long before that conversation began. They did not know about the nights spent thinking about you. They did not know about the memories that refused to disappear. They did not know about the silent promises your person made when nobody was watching. While everyone else saw waiting as weakness, your person saw it differently. To them, waiting was not about wasting time. It was about honoring something that felt real. Something they could not replace simply because other people wanted them to. Don't skip. The room grew quieter as more pressure was applied. Another voice joined in. Then another. Each person offered reasons why your person should move on. Some spoke gently. Others spoke harshly. They talked about stability. They talked about age. They talked about family expectations. They talked about what society would think. The conversation became overwhelming. It felt as though every argument in the world was being placed on one side of a scale while your person's feelings stood alone on the other. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of becoming weaker, your person became calmer. Instead of becoming confused, they became clearer. Instead of giving in, they began remembering. They remembered the first moment they realized their feelings for you were different. They remembered the conversations that stayed with them long after they ended. They remembered the connection that could never be fully explained to anyone else. While others spoke from logic, your person was listening to something deeper. A truth they had carried quietly for a very long time. Someone finally lost patience. "How much longer are you going to wait?" they demanded. The room became completely still. Everyone turned toward your person. Everyone expected hesitation. Everyone expected uncertainty. Instead, your person slowly lifted their head and gave an answer nobody was prepared to hear. They said, "As long as it takes." The silence that followed was unforgettable. Some people stared in disbelief. Others looked away. A few exchanged shocked glances. They had expected compromise. They had expected fear. They had expected surrender. What they received instead was conviction. Not loud conviction. Not dramatic conviction. Just the quiet strength of someone who knew exactly what their heart was saying. Don't skip. The discussion continued, but the energy had changed. The people who entered the conversation believing they could change your person's mind suddenly realized they were facing something much stronger than simple emotion. They were facing loyalty. They were facing faith. They were facing a connection that refused to disappear simply because circumstances had become difficult. One relative tried a different approach. What if they never come back? They asked. The question struck the room like lightning. For the first time, everyone leaned forward, waiting for the response. Your person paused. Not because they lacked an answer, but because the answer mattered. Then they quietly said, "Loving someone is not always about guarantees." Once again, silence filled every corner of the room. Because deep down, everyone knew that answer came from a place beyond logic. It came from experience. It came from genuine feeling. It came from a heart that had already made its decision long ago. As the conversation continued, people began realizing something uncomfortable. They were trying to convince your person to abandon something they themselves had never fully understood. They could see the waiting. They could measure the time. But they could not measure the bond. They could not calculate the memories. They could not explain why your name still carried so much weight inside your person's heart. Hours seemed to pass. Arguments repeated themselves. New suggestions were offered. Potential marriage prospects were mentioned. Future plans were discussed. Yet every road led back to the same place. You. Your name remained at the center of everything. Even when nobody spoke it aloud. Even when people tried avoiding it. Even when the conversation moved in different directions. Your presence remained impossible to ignore. Don't skip, then came the moment nobody expected. An older family member who had remained silent throughout most of the discussion finally spoke. Everyone immediately stopped talking. The room respected this person's opinion. They looked at your person carefully. Then they asked a simple question. Do you truly believe what you're waiting for is real? The entire room froze. Because this question was different. This was not about marriage. This was not about pressure. This was about truth. Your person's eyes softened. And without hesitation they answered. Yes. Just one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 conversations. The older family member nodded slowly. They looked around the room. Then they said something nobody expected. If their faith is this strong after everything they've faced, perhaps what they're waiting for deserves more respect than we've given it. The atmosphere changed instantly. Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged the statement. Because deep down, everyone suddenly realized something important. You cannot force a heart to forget. You cannot command feelings to disappear. You cannot replace a connection simply because it is inconvenient. And most importantly, you cannot make someone stop believing in what feels real to them. The room that had once been filled with pressure now sat in complete silence. Each person lost in their own thoughts. Each person reconsidering what they believed. Each person recognizing that your person's decision was not based on weakness. It was based on courage. Because walking away would have been easier. Giving up would have been simpler. Following everyone else's expectations would have required less strength. But your person chose the harder path. The path of honesty. The path of loyalty. The path of staying true to what their heart already knew. And as the gathering finally came to an end, something remarkable happened. Nobody mentioned marriage again. Nobody demanded a decision. Nobody tried changing your person's mind. The conversation was over. Not because everyone agreed, but because everyone understood. Some battles cannot be won through persuasion. Some feelings cannot be erased through pressure. Some names remain written too deeply within the heart. And as your person walked away from that room, carrying the same feelings they had carried before entering it, one truth remained stronger than ever. The world may have told them to stop waiting. The world may have urged them to move on. The world may have presented countless alternatives. But when the moment of truth arrived, when every voice pushed in the opposite direction, when every reason to give up stood directly in front of them, your person revealed what nobody else expected. They were not waiting because they had nothing else. They were waiting because, despite everything, their heart still recognized something irreplaceable. And that realization left the entire room silent. Don't skip. After that conversation ended, everyone believed the matter was settled, but they were wrong. The silence that filled the room that day did not mean the pressure had disappeared. It only meant the pressure had changed shape. Instead of open arguments, there were now quiet conversations behind closed doors. Instead of direct demands, there were subtle suggestions. Instead of confronting your person face to face, people began planting doubts little by little, hoping time would accomplish what their words could not. Yet every attempt produced the opposite result. The more your person was pushed away from what they felt, the more clearly they understood why those feelings had survived for so long. Days passed, then weeks. Life continued moving forward on the surface. Responsibilities demanded attention. Family gatherings came and went. New opportunities appeared. New faces entered and exited your person's life. From the outside, it seemed as though everything was normal. But deep inside, something important was happening. Your person was beginning to understand that real feelings are tested not during easy moments but during periods of uncertainty. Anyone can hold on when everything is going well. Anyone can believe when signs are obvious. The true test comes when answers are delayed, when circumstances become confusing, and when everyone around you tells you to choose a different path. There were nights when your person sat alone, replaying conversations in their mind. They remembered every argument made against waiting. They remembered every warning. They remembered every prediction that claimed their feelings would eventually fade. But no matter how many times they examined those words, one question continued returning to them. If this connection was supposed to disappear, why had it survived everything that was thrown against it? Why had distance failed? Why had time failed? Why had pressure failed? Why had fear failed? The answers never arrived in the form of logic. They arrived as a feeling, a quiet certainty that remained untouched despite every challenge. Don't skip. One evening, another conversation took place. This time it happened in a much smaller room. Only a few family members were present. The atmosphere was calmer, but the purpose remained the same. Someone carefully introduced the idea of a new marriage proposal. They spoke respectfully. They described the person's qualities. They explained why the match made sense. They emphasized security, compatibility, and stability. Everything sounded reasonable. Everything sounded practical. Everything sounded exactly like the kind of future most people would immediately accept. Your person listened politely. They did not interrupt. They did not become angry. They did not argue. When the explanation ended, everyone waited. The room became quiet. Then your person asked a single question. Would it be fair to them? The people present looked confused. What do you mean? Your person lowered their eyes briefly before speaking. Would it be fair for me to enter someone's life while my heart is still somewhere else? No one answered. Because suddenly the conversation was no longer about marriage proposals. It was about honesty. And honesty has a way of exposing truths that people would rather avoid. The silence that followed felt familiar. It was the same silence that had filled the larger room weeks earlier. The silence that appears when nobody can deny what has just been said. Your person continued quietly, they deserve someone who can choose them completely. Not someone trying to replace feelings they never truly left behind. Once again, nobody had a response. Because deep down, everyone knew your person was right. Don't skip. As months continued passing, something unexpected began happening among the very people who once pressured your person the most. They started paying closer attention. They noticed how consistent your person's feelings remained. They noticed how no amount of persuasion changed their heart. They noticed how every attempt to redirect their future led back to the same place. Slowly, skepticism began turning into curiosity. One relative who had been especially critical finally approached your person privately. I don't understand it, they admitted. Your person smiled gently. You don't have to. But why? The relative asked. Why are you still holding on? Your person thought carefully before answering. Then they said something that would stay with that relative forever. Because some people enter your life and become part of your story. And once that happens, forgetting them isn't a decision you make. It's something your heart either does or doesn't do. The relative stood silently.